So let's talk about cognitive functions. So I want to talk specifically about the archetypes of each cognitive functions today. And in order to understand this, you must first understand the the three big dichotomies of the mind. Yeah. The first dichotomy has to do with libido, and the second and third dichotomy is more functional. Let's get to the first dichotomy, the libido. Libido has these two polarities between extroversion and introversion. So, Jung described extroversion in his book as as this kind of energy that is flowing from the object to the subject and back to the object. So when you see these dynamics, you would think of the activity of pursuit, and this makes extroversion related to this libido of appetite. So they would tend towards the continuation of life. And that's why Jung said that extroverts tend to extroverts focus on having more kids in order to in order to continue their species. It's their defense mechanism. All right. While introverts, on the other hand, they're more about surviving. I'm not saying that introverts are always in this survival mode, but they their passion has something to do with preventing death. So it's like, even though they're still passionate about it, but it is something that is not related to procreation. It is more related to skills in order to survive, right? So it's more protective, it's more defensive against threats, also offensive, but not in the sense of sexual procreation or recreation. So they're about maintaining something, about acquiring a skill. So, in essence, introversion is this mechanism that is cautious. And now we're moving to the functional dichotomies. And in the functional dichotomies, there are two dichotomies. We have the first one, the first dichotomy is related to localities. So you have the external and the internal. The external has something to do with the present moment. They're always here. They can be verified by everyone in that moment. So they're what we are thinking of when we talk about reality. And the internal has something to do, it is more individualistic. It's talking about the future and the past, and also the alternative reality. So it's the imagination and all the richness of our internal world. It is all contained within the internal dichotomy. And then the third, the last dichotomy is more directly related to the functions of our mind, which is perception and modulation. So this is more subject related compared to the locality, because locality is about the external world and internal world. So there is a mechanism that is playing between the two, and they're out of the subject's consciousness. But for function of perception and modulation, they're more directly related to the subject itself. Because if this perception is about this kind of taking in information without any filter. So they're just about the acquiring of information, while modulation is about how we handle those informations, whether in the external or internal. And then when we combine these two dichotomies, the dichotomies of locality and the function, we have external perception, which is sensation. And then we have internal perception, which is intuition. And then external modulation, which is feeling. I do think it's more related to feeling, because feeling is about how we conduct our behaviors, how we modulate our feelings, how we pursue something, how we control and direct other people and adapt to them. So feeling is more external, I think. And then we have thinking, which is the internal modulation. So when we combine these four functions with introvert, with the libido, we will have the 8 psychological types that Jung are describing in his book. So, all right. I will specifically focusing on the archetypes of each of these cognitive functions in this video. So the first cognitive psychological type is extroverted sensation. The archetype for extroverted sensation is the hunter. So when I'm saying archetype, I'm referring to the symbolic representation that is easy to be understood by everyone. Not necessarily in the sense that Jung described them, because Jung had these very specific archetypes that he found. But I'm talking about this in accordance to my own understanding that I think people would easily understand. So, the archetype of the hunter, extroverted sensation, would would tend to pursue objects from moment to moment, and yeah, extroverted sensation. People with extroverted sensation will tend to pursue an object from moment to moment, and they will feel it will be excitatory for them. So it's energizing because when they it's akin to seeing something that is conducive to life, and then you pursue it. So basically, when we're talking about humans, the human mind, we are not we cannot separate perception and modulation because both of them are always happening all together at the same time. So when we talk about extrovert sensation, of course they are being led by their sensation, but they will also have their other functions working. It's just that they are being led by the sensation. So in this case, their sensation would be very strong and it detects an object, an external object, as 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 conducive, as being conducive to life, and then they will pursue it. And this pursuing is the modulation working. But this pursuit will always bow down to the sensation. So it's not independent from the sensation. So that's how the hunter archetype works. And the next archetype we have is the introverted sensation. Now, before we get into this, I really need to explain that Jung actually have this description between introverted sensation and extroverted intuition reversed. So this is really a problem in the current MBTI community. There is so many confusions regarding SINE, etc. But especially SINNE. So in current MBTI definitions, they would say SI is related to the sense of tradition, the sense of memory and habits, right? While extroverted intuition is imagination, creativity, and also it's anything that is creative, right? So they're more expansive and smart, and they have high IQ according to MBTI. And then we also have Jung, which actually, according to Jung himself, this is not the case. So, according to Jung, introverted sensation is actually the function that have this rich internal fantasy because they see mountains, rocks as caricatures and characters. And so when you see Jung describing this introverted sensation, you would pretty much see as if this is as if he is describing someone who is schizophrenic, right? You should see psychological types on the chapter for introverted sensation. This is wildly different with the descriptions that are really popular in our current MBTI circle. And then you also have, according to Jung, extroverted intuition. There are people who tend to start projects and then abandon them, and they move from one thing to another thing to another thing and never stops. So that's the kind of the difference between extroverted intuition and introverted sensation according to Jung. This is not at all the same with the extroverted intuition and SI that we know in MBTI. But I want to tell you right now that both of these descriptions are actually mistaken. Although Jung actually have the right categories and he really describes this the difference between these two dynamics, but they're actually reversed. So in my understanding, after I have been thinking about this through and through, what Jung described, the characteristics that Jung ascribed to extroverted intuition, is they are actually more rightly to be ascribed to introverted sensation. Why? And vice versa, by the way. Well, according to the definition that we already know about extroversion and introversion, so extroversion is this function of appetite and it's pursuing objects that it has appetites for, while introversion is this dynamics, is this mechanism of avoiding something or circumventing something or prevent them from happening. It is more cautious. So with so this means that introverted sensation would be someone who is being led by their sensation in a cautious way. And what that means? This means that an introverted sensor would be someone who is jumping from one thing to another. They would jump from one situation to another situation indefinitely. So they would be the people who create projects and then abandon them. And also, they tend to be gamblers. And this is actually the mark of the inferior extroverted intuition. Not These characteristics are not extroverted intuition in its best moment. Excuse me for a second. Let me talk about this while smoking. So, extroverted intuition, introverted intuition, I'm sorry. Introverted intuition, introverted sensing, I'm really sorry. Right. The archetype that matches these kind of tendencies would be the survivor. So, as I would tend to encounter a situation that they don't like, that are actually that are actually is seen as something that is propagating death. So it's natural for everyone when they encounter something that might be causing death, they would then avoid it or prevent it or destroy it, right? And this is also what introverted sensation does to a person. And when they see these objects, they might feel afraid or they feel bored, and then they will try to find new things over and over again. It is not always that the thing that they encounter is boring. It can also be that the thing that they encounter is traumatizing or creating fear, inducing fear. So there are realms of possibilities in this introversion. They can be avoiding the the current situation that they are in sensation led. So that's the archetype that you will have for introverted sensation. And for extroverted intuition, well, when you combine extroversion, which is appetitive, with intuition, which is internal perception, you will have someone who is constantly perceiving a dream, an imagination that is optimistic. And so, like some systems describing right now, you will have this person who looks naive, all right? So, what archetype, what symbolic representation that would fit this this person the most? I would say that the The picture of a herald or a good messenger would come to my mind. So there this person who is rich of the fantasy world, of these caricatures, and this actually fits with the descriptions that Jung gave to introverted sensation. And this is why I say that Jung actually have it reversed. I actually think this description is more fit to be given to extroverted intuition. And MBTI got it even more wrong. So so in MBTI they actually ascribe this this world of fantasy and also these characteristics of jumping from one thing to another thing. They ascribe both of these things to extroverted intuition, and that's just wrong. These two these are two different characteristics pertaining to two different cognitive functions. And this kind of jumping is actually pertaining to extroverted intuition, while this reach, I'm sorry, this kind of jumping from one thing to another is actually pertaining to introverted sensation, and then this rich internal fantasy world pertains to extroverted intuition. Alright? So I hope you get that now. So the next and the last perception function is the type of introverted intuition. So introverted intuition has been kind of mythologicized. I'm sorry, I'm not really sure the correct English for that. But basically, everyone wants to be introverted intuitive, introverted intuitive. Everyone wants to be NI for some reason. Maybe because MBTI says that NI is the rarest type. But this is actually the the statistic from MBTI, which I don't think is accurate, because they already have these people, these these mistypings based on their misunderstandings of what the functions actually are. So for introverted intuition, the archetype that is most suitable for this type is the opposite of the herald. They are the messenger of death, right? And it sounds really terrifying, but it's also an important and integral part of human society. They would they would see this kind of vision that are not convenient to be told to everyone else. And at first, they would have to keep denying it and denying it. And this is how they become more cautious with their intuition, and they tend to be skeptical with their intuition. Introverted sensors are also skeptical to external reality, but for introverted intuition, it tends to make a person more skeptical to their own conclusions. So they tend to sharpen and sharpen these ideas until they cannot really ignore it any longer. And at that moment, they become these these stereotypes of the alarmist or the serpent. They bring bad news to everyone. But paradoxically, by bringing this, by letting everyone know this, this bad intuition, this negative, this pessimistic outlook towards the future or the past, they actually give people lessons or precautions on, and then they let people find solutions for it. As long as they're able to actually formulate these visions into words that can reach other people, it's actually a good thing. And that's also why the image of a prophet is often is often being ascribed to introverted intuitives. If extroverted intuitives are the angels or the heralds, then introverted intuitives would be the the prophet. So to recapitulate, the archetypes for perception types are: for extroverted sensors, the hunter; for introverted sensor, the survivor; for extroverted intuition, the herald; and for introverted intuitives, uh, I'm still not decided between the serpent or the prophet. Alright. So moving to the modulators. In modulative functions, what we have is this tendency to be more based on an instinct. So there is a desire to do something and they want to accomplish it. They want to they want to impose it to the object. So in a sense, they are more active and more rigid. They're more inflexible. And the first type that we're gonna talk about is extroverted feeling. So extroverted feelers, they tend to have this kind of mission to bring good to people, no matter what. So they would be motherly or fatherly. They're this archetype of the giver or even the Messiah. So they give and give to another people, but they also have this tendency to enable people who might not have their best interest in mind or other people's best interest in mind. So while they might be the Messiah, they can also be the anti Messiah, right? But all of these functions have their positive representations and negative representations. In when effective, an extroverted feeler would be someone who is guiding other people. They would be like the shepherd to their lambs. And this is generally a good thing. So that's the archetype for extrovert feeling. They're more this archetype of the giver or even the leader. While for introverted feeling, since introverted feeling is more cautious, but both feeling is externally imposed. But in introverted version, it would be more cautious. So their modulation would show up in a way that is more caring and try to avoid something from happening. So they could be more neurotic, but not necessarily. They could appear as this kind of heroic figure, like a knight, right? So they have this heroic main, this heroic build, and they are ready to destroy the enemy or to protect something. So the archetype for Fi is the fighter. That's the correct archetype. It can also be the hero. All right. They would be someone who lead other people in the right way in this. So there will be many prohibitions. So it can also be kind of moralistic. And this is also another case where Jung actually reversed between extroverted thinking and introverted feeling.
But yeah, this category still exists, and this description of introverted feeling that I have just described actually matches with what Jung described in his section about extroverted thinking, just minus the thinking part, because there are some descriptions that are more rightly to be put into the description of FI, and some that are more pertaining to TE. But this is this is right. This is you will see that the way that these are coupling actually makes more sense. All right. So let's move to extroverted thinking. So extroverted thinking is the function that is more internal, but they would be modulating they would be modulating their thoughts in a positivistic ways. They would be creative, they would be planning, and they have some vision in their mind that they want to fulfill. So both internal and external functions, they both evolutionarily, they both actually have the purpose, have the task to that have something to do with the external world in order to survive and propagate the species. But the difference is the external is immediate, while the internal is more indirect. It's more about the future and the past, something that is not immediate in the present moment. So the internal functions would be about trying to do something with the future by gauging the informations from the past. And so does with in extroverted thinking. Extroverted thinking is about applying it's about applying logic, and then they would try to organize their mind in order to achieve something in the future, in the eventual future. If external is, if external functions are momentary, then internal functions are eventual. So the best archetype that we can give to extroverted thinking is the maybe the favorite, but but not always the favorite. I think it's more adequate to the best archetype to describe TE is the cryptic. They are they are very cryptic. So if you know about the defense mechanisms of animals, you will have you will know that there are two kinds of mechanisms that they could employ. The first one is the aposematism. This, these creatures would display themselves in an unnatural colors, colors that are very bright, and this actually intimidates the potential predators. While the second mechanism, the second defense mechanism is this through this cryptic cryptic uh, mimicking of their surroundings. So they would tend to like not make themselves attracting attentions, and that would be how TE is operating in the world. They are secretful, they are secretive on how they on how they kind of go through their lives, but they will eventually reach that place. They will eventually reach this vision, or at least if they're effective, they will do so. So for so the best archetype that we can give to TE is the cryptid. Cryptid is the creatures that have this that tend to hide. They're these mythological creatures that are they are not generally seen, but when you meet them, they will be attracting you. Because thinking is internal, they would not be direct, but they but this extroversion in thinking, it would work in bringing life to them. All right, so it is actually more attracting, it's more about attracting these potential predators. But if that is the case, all right, it will mean that TE would be more aposematic. Yeah, I'm sorry, but TE is more correctly described as aposematic. So they will have this tendency to attract people, whether they want it or not, but they will attract people. And the negative version of this, they will attract a predator instead of a lover, instead of their vision. So that's extroverted thinking. Now moving on to introverted thinking. We will have people who are secretive also, but they're more about preventing something to happen since it's introverted. So they will try to to avoid all of these dangers, and they sort of invent new things in order to prevent these things from happening. And the best archetype that we can ascribe to TI is the wizard or the magician. So if you pair these opposing modulating functions, you will have FE, the Messiah or the giver, with TI, the internal critics or the magician. So one thing that I also want to add about TI, they would tend to repel death. So so yes, so you also have this archetype of an orphan, but it's more in the negative archetype, and all of these functions have their negative archetypes. I just haven't list them down yet, so but I will do that later probably. So you have this FE, the Messiah, with the magician, right? So people tend to see this coupling in stories. And then you also have FI with TE, the aposematic or the fairy with the knight, with the hero. So these two coupling are also often to be seen in stories. Maybe TE would also be seen as the princess, but they're kind of this attracting factor which TE is trying to protect. They can be the innocent child or etc. So you can kind of see how these dynamics play between the opposing functions in a person. In SE and IE, you have the hunter and the serpent and the kind of shaman or the prophet. And NE and in NESI, you have the herald with the survivor. So these two dynamics will play into someone's psyche and create the type that they are. So that's all for tonight. That's all for tonight. I will expand on this later. See you again next time.